Hi, in the last lecture we looked at how to add a Bootstrap theme to our mezzanine theme. And what I want to do in this lecture as quickly as possible, and bearing in mind this is not a quick subject, but I'm just going to skim over the surface. Obviously, if you would like to do more research on this and make it your own, that's entirely up to you. But I want to cover variable and bootstrap.less and the scss equivalent. So, what do these files mean? If you are familiar with CSS preprocessors, then you can skip this lecture. But this lecture is really just a filler lecture for those of you who don't know too much about this and want some background behind it. So basically, less and SCSS, also known as sass, um, are two different CSS preprocessors. Now, what on earth is a preprocessor? Basically, what a CSS preprocessor is a special type of language very similar to CSS, which allows you to create CSS based off of that. And the whole purpose of SCSS is to allow you to create less markup, to create things like variables, to nest your selectors, and in general, just make your life a lot easier with regards to writing CSS. What it does is also takes care of a lot of the issues such as minification, so making your files smaller, adding vendor prefixes. So, for example, if you need to use a vendor prefix for Flexbox or something like that, so SCSS and less will add that for you. You can also do really cool things such as create functions in your preprocessors, uh, create templates for classes in your preprocessors, and create variables, which is very helpful for things such as colors that you're going to use often. You can just call that variable instead of actually having to include the hexadecimal or RGB color code in your file. So the first thing that we need to do with our CSS preprocessors is actually create a task manager. So a really cool task manager that I like to use is called Grunt. So if we do a little Google search for Grunt, you'll see it's a JavaScript task runner. So if you're familiar with JavaScript at all, hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. You can see here we have sass that is used with JavaScript, and you'll also see that grunt is a command line based tool. So you need to be quite familiar with the command line to use this. Don't worry if you're not. I hope by this stage in the series you have a little bit of an understanding of how the command line works and how to navigate it. But if not, we're going to be covering it in this lecture. So the next thing that we need to look at is how to get Grunt to work with SCSS. And basically what Grunt will do is Grunt will actually handle the task manager side of things. So what we are going to do is we're going to create a Grunt watch script. And what that's going to do is it's going to watch our files or our SCSS or our less files, watch them, and if any changes take place in those files, it will automatically run our grunt script and it will create a new CSS file based off our SCSS or our less file. So I'm going to use SCSS just because I prefer that and that's what I'm used to working. So let's do a little Google search for getting started with grunt and SCSS, also known as sass. And great, the article that I'm looking for comes up straight away. The reason that I'm using this article is I would like you guys to go to the site, and there's a lot of code that you can just copy from the site and put straight into your project. So the main things that I want to look at is this command here. So what this command here will do is it will let you install the Grunt command line interface onto your system. But in order to do that, you need to have what is known as NPM, which stands for Node Package Manager. So this is a Node thing. So regardless of what operating system you're on, you will need to install Node. So let's open this up in a new tab. And if you don't already have Node installed, I would suggest going to the Node website and just installing Node for your relevant operating system. Basically what Node is a JavaScript engine based off the Chrome JavaScript processor, the Google Chrome JavaScript processor. And what it allows you to do is essentially server-side JavaScript processing. So this is a really cool development, and there is a lot of work going into server-side JavaScript processors, especially with APIs, and this is usually based on Node. Um, we are only going to use Node for its package manager, so we're not going to use it for anything else. So if you haven't already done that, you'll see Chrome's JavaScript engine. If you haven't already done that, just go ahead and install a Node onto your system, and then you will have access to Node's package manager. The next thing that I want to look at is if you're a Windows user, you will need to go ahead and install Ruby. So you can go to rubyinstaller.org and then find your appropriate download and then just download that onto your system. The reason that we're installing Ruby is because sass or CSS is originally written in Ruby. As far as I know, there is a JavaScript version, so sass has been completely rewritten in JavaScript, but for the purposes of this lecture, it would be great if you just go ahead and install Ruby on your system. If you're a Mac user, you won't have to do that because Ruby is built into Mac, so good for you. Cool, and once those two things are installed, you should be able to go ahead and run npm install global, so the G stands for global, so you install it throughout your whole system, and then grunt-cli, which is your grunt command line interface. Great, and once you've done that, now we should have all of the variables set up for us, so for future projects we don't have to redo the stuff. We can just skip straight on to the next section. Cool. So the next section basically gives you three options. The first option is to install your dependencies, which we will be installing. We need the watch dependency to watch our files to change, and we obviously need the sass dependency as well to actually compile our SCSS into CSS. npm init will try and automate this process and put it onto your command line. And the third, you can have a template file set up, and then you'll just need to run npm install, and it will run all of this for you ready. So I'm going to go with option number 3 because it's really nice to have a little template that we can use on all of our projects, and we can obviously edit this on a per project basis, and we can use this to every time we create a new project, we can use the same file. So I'm going to set up a package.json file and put this code into that. So I'm just going to copy this, go back to our code, and then let's just do it within our static folder for now. This is not really best practice, but you can put your, ideally would be in an assets folder, but you can put this anywhere in your project that you want. So I'm going to go into our static folder and create a new file called package.json and save that, and I'm going to paste the code in there. So under project name, I'm just going to say my project because that is the name of the project. You obviously want to put your project's name in there, and the version, and then we need to look at the dependencies and put the dependencies in here. So if you've worked at all with JavaScript, you'll notice that we are using JSON here, which is obviously package.json. And what this is doing is this is creating a JSON object which our grunt file will have a look at, and will attempt, well actually it'll be our Node package manager will have a look at, and we'll attempt to install these dependencies and create them in a folder called Node modules. So that's obviously Node for Node package manager. So this you can kind of see is just regular JSON. So now we actually need to put our dependencies in here. So let's scroll down a little bit on our page, and you'll see that it already gives us our dependencies. So let's copy those 3 dependencies. Obviously we need to have the grunt dependency installed, we need to have the sass dependency installed, and we need to have the watch dependency installed. So let's go back to our file and we can save this. And now our package.json file has been successfully created. And what we should be able to do now is just go back to our command line, go to the file in which this package.json is sitting, and run npm install. And that should just install all of these packages in a node modules folder. So let's go back to our command line. I'm going to open up a new tab with Command D, or obviously the equivalent on a Windows machine if you're using that. And I'm just going to go ls, and I'm going to go into cd into my already in my project. I need to cd into the static folder. And we'll see our package.json is here. So now we should be able to just go npm install. And you'll see it's now going to the Node package manager online, and it's pulling in all these dependencies. Obviously, again, if you would like to investigate this stuff yourself, you can do that, but I'm using the example code here, so this is really, really minimal. And you'll see that all of our libraries have successfully been installed. So now if we go back to our code, what you'll notice, as I mentioned before, that a nodes module folder has been created. You do not ever need to touch this folder. There is a whole lot of dependency stuff for our watch and our sass and our grunt dependencies that have been installed. You'd never ever need to touch this. All you need to know is that it is here. If you're using something like version control, it might be better to just include your package.json file and add your node modules folder to your git ignore, and then whenever somebody is setting up your repository or the project on their computer, so they will just be able to download this themselves instead of having a whole lot of extra stuff in your repository. Cool. Now the next thing that we need to do is actually create our grunt file, and this is the file that's going to be run, and it's going to call these dependencies and is going to tell our files what to do at various points. So I'm just going to copy this example grunt file. You don't have to worry too much about how this works, besides a couple of small tweaks that we will need to make. So inside of the same folder, in our static folder, I'm going to create a grunt file.js. Now, obviously, the naming conventions of these files, package.json and grunt file.js, are very important because Grunt and Node Package Manager are looking for those files specifically. So let's save this grunt file.js and paste our grunt file in there. And what you can see now is it's actually creating some JavaScript. You can see it's loading our libraries in here, and it's calling our watch task by default. So the default task, if we just had to run grunt in this folder, would run the watch task. So where is our watch task? Here is our watch task here, and it's looking for files, anything, so any file in a folder, any folder that has a file anything.scss will run the task sass. So if anything here changes while our watch is running, so this task will run. And this task we can find up here, and it's obviously looking for packages in our package.json file, which is here, and then that references them back to the node modules folder and all the files inside there. So here we're calling our sass task or scss task, and then this is the distribution that's going to happen. It's going to run our sass file. So this is the CSS file that it's going to create, and this is the file that it's going to look for to find as a reference. So obviously what we need to do then is create a folder called sass, and we can edit this however we want to. So we've got a sass folder, and then I'm just going to name it the same way that we've done before. So in WordPress it has a default style.css, so we can actually just leave that. I'm going to create a file inside of here and just call it style.scss, so we can add our custom style to that. And we don't need to call this at all in our actual project. We're only going to be working with the minified CSS file. So we can go into, we can change this to CSS. And then you'll see once we've created this, a style.css file should appear in here. So just for the sake of this example, I'm going to actually create a link to our style.css file here. I'm going to run it after our custom theme. So if our custom theme applies any styles, so our custom style.css or scss file will overwrite those. So we're going to find that in CSS, and then it's going to be style.css. So we don't ever pull scss into our project. We only use it for pre-processing reasons. Cool. So now we have that set up. You can now see we have our it's watching anything.scss. So the anything could be the sass folder, and then style.scss is watching that. Obviously, it takes up processing power the broader you make this. So we can just change this to, oopsie, we can change this to file, and this is obviously relative to our grunt file.js. So we can say sass, and then we can watch style.scss. And at the moment it's pulling in a string. If we wanted to watch more than one file specifically, obviously we can use the special star command. Otherwise, we can actually put this into a JavaScript array and then list multiple files here. So if we had another Sass file called custom, we could put that in there. So that's really cool. So it can watch multiple files. And this is also nice if we're doing something like JavaScript uglification or minification. That works nicely with that. And then we can do the same thing here. We can add multiple files that need to be processed from Sass into SCSS. Awesome. So this should all work great. So I'm going to leave this blank for now. I'm going to go back to our terminal. And because we're in the right file now, you can see we have our grunt file.js. So if we run the grunt command, which is the default command, you can see that it's running our watch task. And that is because we've made the default task watch. And watch is obviously a stateful task that's, as soon as we change something, we'll see that this actually processes that file. So the only time it's ever going to change something is if we're going to our SCSS style.scss file and actually change something in there. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and let's make our body background blue as we did before. And as soon as so you'll notice nothing's happened yet here. So let's give ourselves a bit of breathing room. So nothing's happened yet. It's waiting. You can add a bit of space here to see that nothing's happened. And as soon as we save this, you will notice that we get a warning. That's fantastic. So it's telling us that our SCSS isn't valid. So error generating source map, couldn't, no file name, there's nothing source map linked to it. Let's just go back here and see if it's actually added anything. It actually has gone ahead and created our file here, but it's giving us an error. And it's saying there's a syntax error. Couldn't determine the public URL for the source style sheet. So I suspect our issue with regards to this is because our version of Sass is obsolete. This version here that we've pulled in, sorry, our version of the Sass compiler. So the latest version, from what I can see, is around about version 1 of the time of recording this. So let's change the version over here. So this little squiggly line here means roundabout version 1. So let's save that. And then what I want to do is I want to cancel this and then rerun our npm install. So let's just let that happen. And yes, our new version has now been created. So now we can go grunt, normal grunt, run that and watch. And now if we go ahead and save this, we are not getting any errors. Great stuff, guys. Cool. So now you can see it. What it has also done is it's generated a CSS, a style.css.map file. And basically what this is doing is this is allowing us to map our CSS to our SCSS. And if we go to our style.css, it'll actually give us the route to our source map. So don't worry about this. This is completely valid. And this is really nice for debugging, so we can see even though we're only pulling in the CSS into our project, the source map will allow us to actually to trace whatever issues we have back to our style.scss. Another cool thing about this is if we just went ahead and refreshed the front end of our site. So let's go back to the front end of our site. We should see now that the background color has changed to blue. Awesome, guys. This is all that I'm going to be covering with regards to task management, specifically for SCSS. If you want to go ahead and go into the Bootstrap, you can actually go ahead and download the SCSS file if you want to. copy that, and you can paste it into your style.scss. We also need to load another file before this. So what you can do with SCSS if you want to is actually import files into other files. So if we go to variable, because variable is also what we need, and for the sake of this example, I'm just going to paste it before this. So ideally we divide these into two separate files. Go ahead and save this. It's giving us an error. What is it saying? Undefined mixin. Okay, and what it's looking for here is for a mixin that can only be found in a bootstrap.scss setup. So I don't want to get into the logistics of bringing in the whole of Bootstrap into an SCSS file, but essentially what this means is that in our base.html, we would then need to take this out, this bootstrap.css, and pull this in as an SCSS file. And you can see how something like this could get really complicated really quickly. The way that we would look for our bootstrap.scss is if we open up a new tab, and the chances are that we're going to find a Git repository that comes up. Here we go. So inside of here, let's do a quick search for this and see what comes up. What you'll find is that this is actually a mixin. Here we go. That's being created under asset style sheets, bootstraps, mixins, gradient.scss. So what this is a bootstrap function, and this is pulled in when, like I say, the entire bootstrap SCSS library is pulled in. And then what you'll notice as well is that if we actually go to the base of our Bootstrap style sheets section, you'll see that bootstrap.scss is pulled in with this folder here, and then the assumption is that all of these are pulled into bootstrap.scss eventually. And if we load this file, you'll see that it's importing all of these mixins, which is another name for functions, and variables, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not going to go through the whole process of pulling this in right now. So as a quick fix or a bit of a hack, I'm going to actually just remove the place where it's looking for this gradient vertical 3 colors. So I'm just going to remove that from our style.scss file. And you'll now see that we don't have any issues. It says OK. So let's just reload that again, just so that you can see that it is in fact OK. So I'm going to cancel my grunt and I'm going to run it. You'll see everything's OK. We actually need to make a change here, save it, and it's successfully working.